Here's a number I want you to remember: 30%. That is the gap between how often men reach orgasm during sex and how often their female partners do. 30 percentage points. In study after study, across tens of thousands of couples in long-term relationships and short ones, in couples who describe themselves as happy and connected, in couples who have been together for decades, 30%. And here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. Before you attribute that number to biology or age or simply the way things are, the reason for that gap is not anatomy. It is not age. It is not compatibility. It is one specific, learnable thing that most men were simply never taught. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly what it is and exactly what to do about it. My name is Dr. Julia Rhodes. I am a certified men's sex therapist with over a decade of clinical experience working exclusively with male sexual health and intimate program relationships. In that time, I have worked with thousands of men and with the couples they are part of. I have sat with men who are frustrated, confused, and quietly carrying the weight of a partner who seems distant, disconnected, or persistently unsatisfied in the bedroom. And I have sat with those same men weeks and months later after they received the information I'm sharing with you today and watched their relationships transform. Not because they became different men, because they became informed ones. That is what this channel is for. Real information, clinical truth, the conversations that are not happening anywhere near enough, brought into the open where they can actually do some good. If you are a man over 60 who wants to show up fully for your partner, who wants to understand her body, her needs, and her experience with the same seriousness you bring to every other area of your life, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, I bring you research-backed, clinically grounded conversations about men's sexual health and relationships. No embarrassment, no outdated advice, no guesswork, just the truth delivered with the respect you and your partner deserve. Hit subscribe, and let's get into it. The orgasm gap, what the research actually shows. Let me give you the full picture of that number because the 30% figure is not an estimate. It is not anecdote. It is one of the most robustly documented findings in the clinical literature on human sexuality. The study I am drawing from was published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, one of the most respected, peer-reviewed journals in the field of human sexuality. It surveyed over 50,000 adults across a broad range of ages, relationship types, and demographics. And what it found was consistent, striking, and impossible to dismiss. 95% of heterosexual men reported usually or always reaching orgasm during sexual encounters. 65% of heterosexual women reported the same. That is a 30-point gap in a study of 50,000 people. And that finding has been replicated in different populations, in different countries, across different research methodologies, with remarkable consistency. Now, I want to be careful here about how we frame this. The orgasm gap is not presented in this video as a scorecard. Orgasm is not the only measure of sexual satisfaction, and I would be doing both you and your partner a disservice if I reduced intimacy to a single physiological outcome. Women's sexual satisfaction encompasses pleasure, connection, emotional presence, and the quality of the entire experience, not just its conclusion. But the gap matters. It matters enormously because what it represents, beyond the statistic itself, is a widespread systemic deficit in understanding. A gap not in desire, not in capacity, not in compatibility, but in knowledge. Most men were never taught how female sexual response actually works, not in any meaningful, anatomically accurate, clinically grounded way. What passed for sexual education for most men in this age group was fragmentary at best and actively misleading at worst. It centered penetrative sex as the primary event. It treated female pleasure as secondary, as mysterious, as somehow less mappable than male pleasure. And that foundational deficit, that missing education, is the primary driver behind the orgasm gap. Not anatomy, not age, not the inherent complexity of female sexuality. A gap in knowledge, one that is entirely, completely closable, starting right now. The anatomy most men were never taught. I want to take you back to 1998 because something happened in the medical literature that year that should have changed everything, and largely didn't, not in the way it deserved to. In 1998, an Australian urologist named Dr. Helen O'Connell published landmark anatomical research that, for the first time, accurately mapped the full structure of the clitoris. Using modern dissection techniques and MRI imaging, Dr. O'Connell demonstrated that what most people, including most medical professionals, referred to as the clitoris was in fact only the visible tip of a significantly larger internal structure. Let me be precise about what that structure actually looks like, because understanding this anatomy is not an academic exercise. It is the foundation of everything that follows in this video. The clitoris is not a small external nub. It is a complex, wishbone-shaped internal structure with multiple components. The external glans, the part most people are familiar with, is connected to a shaft that extends internally and then divides into two crura, or legs, that wrap around the vaginal canal. Alongside these crura sit two vestibular bulbs, erectile tissue structures that engorge with blood during arousal in precisely the same way that penile tissue does. The full internal clitoral structure is approximately 3 to 4 in length. It surrounds the vaginal canal on multiple sides, and critically, it is intimately connected to the anterior wall of the vagina. The area commonly referred to as the G-spot is not a separate anatomical structure. It is, in the most current clinical understanding, the internal surface of the clitoral complex felt through the vaginal wall. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because it means that the anatomy of female pleasure is not mysterious. It is not unmappable. It is not fundamentally different in its logic from male anatomy. It is simply an anatomy that was not accurately described in medical textbooks until 1998, and that has still not made its way into the mainstream conversation around sex and intimacy in any meaningful way. Most men are navigating female sexuality with a map that is decades out of date. Today, you have the updated map, and with it, everything changes. The clitoral truth, the technique most men miss. Now, let's talk about what this anatomy means in practice, because this is the section where the research becomes the most practically significant and the most immediately actionable. Dr. Debbie Herbenick at Indiana University conducted one of the most comprehensive studies of female sexual response and orgasm ever undertaken. Her research, drawing on thousands of women across a wide age range, produced a finding that I consider one of the most important pieces of clinical information any man in a relationship with a woman can possess. Approximately 37% of women require direct clitoral stimulation in order to reach orgasm. Not vaginal stimulation, not penetration, direct clitoral stimulation. A further 36% of women reported that while clitoral stimulation is not strictly required for orgasm, it significantly enhances the quality and intensity of their sexual experience. Combined, that is over 70% of women for whom the clitoris is the central architecture of sexual satisfaction. Not a secondary consideration, not a bonus feature, the central architecture. And yet the overwhelming cultural script around heterosexual sex, the script that most men in this age group absorbed without question and have been operating from ever since, centers penetrative sex as the primary event, as the main act, as the experience around which everything else is organized. For over 70% of women, that script is anatomically misaligned with how their pleasure actually works. This is the technique most men miss. Not a physical maneuver, not a position, not a performance skill in the conventional sense. It is the understanding that for the majority of women, penetration alone is not the primary pathway to deep sexual satisfaction, and that the clitoris, in its full anatomical complexity, including its internal extensions, deserves to be the central focus of attention, not an afterthought. What does this mean practically? It means that manual stimulation of the external clitoris, with patience, with attention, with genuine presence, is not foreplay in the dismissive sense that the word is often used. It is not a warm-up act before the real show. For most women, it is the real show. Or at minimum, it is an equally central part of what the real show needs to include. It means that oral stimulation, when a woman is comfortable with it and both partners are willing, is one of the most statistically reliable pathways to female orgasm that exists. Research consistently shows that women reach orgasms significantly more reliably through oral stimulation than through penetration alone. And it means that during penetrative sex, positions and angles that allow for simultaneous clitoral stimulation, either manually or through direct contact, dramatically increase the likelihood of mutual satisfaction. None of this requires performance. None of it requires stamina or physical capability that changes with age. All of it requires knowledge, attention, and the willingness to center your partner's anatomy as seriously as you have always centered your own. That willingness, that genuine, informed attention, is the technique most men miss, and it is entirely within your reach. The role of emotional safety. Why technique alone is never enough. I want to shift the conversation now, because everything I have just shared with you about anatomy and technique rests on a foundation that, if it is not solid, makes all of it significantly less effective. That foundation is emotional safety. Dr. Emily Nagoski, one of the foremost researchers on female sexual response, describes the female arousal system in terms of a dual mechanism, what she calls the sexual accelerator and the sexual brakes. The accelerator responds to stimuli that the brain codes as sexually relevant and safe: touch, connection, desire, emotional presence. The brakes respond to stimuli that the brain codes as reasons not to be aroused: stress, disconnection, feeling unseen, unappreciated, or emotionally unsafe. Here is the critical clinical insight from this research. For most women, the brake system is significantly more sensitive than the accelerator, and the brake system does not distinguish between sources of stress. Financial worry, relationship tension, feeling taken for granted, a critical comment from earlier in the day, the accumulated weight of feeling emotionally invisible in a relationship, all of these activate the brakes. And activated brakes do not simply reduce arousal. They can functionally prevent it, regardless of the physical stimulation being applied. This means that no technique, however anatomically informed, however skillfully applied, can fully override a partner whose brake system is engaged. Emotional safety is not separate from physical arousal in the female sexual response system. For most women, it is a prerequisite for it. What does emotional safety look like in practice? It looks like a relationship in which she feels genuinely seen, not just as a sexual partner, but as a person, in which appreciation is expressed regularly and specifically, not just in the bedroom, in which conflict is repaired rather than allowed to accumulate, in which she trusts that bringing her needs and preferences into the conversation will be met with curiosity and care, not defensiveness or dismissal. For men over 60, who are often navigating decades of established relationship patterns, this section may carry particular weight. Patterns of emotional disconnection that have developed over years do not dissolve instantly, but they do respond to consistent, genuine attention. And the men in my clinical practice who have invested in the emotional architecture of their relationship, who have made their partner feel genuinely safe, seen, and valued outside the bedroom, consistently report the most dramatic transformations in their intimate lives. The bedroom begins long before the bedroom. That is not a romantic abstraction. It is a clinical finding. The slow down principle, time as the most underrated technique. If I were to identify the single highest leverage change that most men over 60 could make immediately, the one adjustment that would produce the most significant shift in their partner's experience with the least complexity, it would be this: slow down, spend more time. I am aware that this sounds almost too simple to be the answer, but the research is unambiguous, and the clinical evidence from my own practice confirms it consistently. Multiple studies on sexual satisfaction in long-term couples have identified a clear and recurring pattern. When women are asked what they most wish their partner would do differently in the bedroom, across age groups, across relationship lengths, across cultural backgrounds, the most common answer is not a technique. It is not a position. It is not a product or a prop. It is time. More time in non-genital touch. More time in emotional connection before physical intimacy begins. More time in what most people loosely call foreplay, though I prefer to reframe that word entirely because it implies that what comes before penetration is somehow preliminary. For most women, it is not preliminary. It is central. Research on female arousal physiology helps explain why. The full arousal cycle for most women is significantly longer than for most men, particularly men in their younger years. Full genital engorgement, vaginal lubrication, and the kind of deep arousal that makes penetration genuinely pleasurable rather than merely tolerable for a woman, all of this takes time. Clinical estimates vary, but research consistently suggests that most women require a minimum of 20 minutes of arousal-building stimulation before they are fully physiologically prepared for penetrative sex. The research on average foreplay duration in long-term heterosexual couples tells a different story. The gap between what most women report as optimal and what most couples actually spend is, in the language of clinical research, significant. For men over 60, there is actually a profound opportunity hidden inside this finding, because the natural changes that come with age, the longer arousal timeline, the greater need for sustained stimulation, are changes that align, rather than conflict, with what your partner has likely always needed. The shift that age brings to male sexual response is, in many respects, a built-in invitation to slow down, to be more present, to invest more time in the quality of the experience rather than the speed of its progression. Men who embrace this shift, who stop experiencing their changed arousal timeline as a loss and start experiencing it as an invitation, consistently report that their intimate lives improve in ways they did not anticipate, not despite slowing down, because of it. The over 60 dimension, her changing body, and what she needs now. Everything I have covered so far applies across the full adult lifespan, but I want to spend time now on something specific, on the particular dimension of this conversation that applies most directly to the women that men over 60 are most likely to be in relationships with, because her body has changed too. For women in the postmenopausal stage, typically from their early 50s onward, though the timeline varies, hormonal shifts produce a set of physiological changes that directly affect sexual experience. And men who understand these changes, who adapt to them with knowledge and care, rather than ignoring them or taking them personally, are the men whose partners report the highest levels of sexual satisfaction in this stage of life. The primary hormonal change is a significant decline in estrogen, and estrogen plays a central role in vaginal health. As estrogen levels fall, the vaginal tissues can become thinner, less elastic, and more sensitive to friction. Natural lubrication, which was previously produced relatively readily in response to arousal, may take longer to develop and may be present in smaller quantities. This does not mean that postmenopausal women are less interested in sex. Research consistently shows that desire and the capacity for arousal and orgasm remain intact well into later life. What it means is that the physiological pathway to arousal requires more time and more deliberate attention than it may have in earlier decades. For men who do not understand this, who proceed at the same pace, with the same assumptions, and the same approach they have always used, the result for their partner can range from reduced pleasure to genuine discomfort. And a partner who has experienced discomfort during sex, even once, carries that experience into every subsequent encounter in ways that engage exactly the brake system I described in the previous section. For men who do understand this, the implications are clear and actionable. More time in arousal-building stimulation before any penetrative contact, the generous use of a high-quality lubricant, not as an admission of inadequacy, but as a straightforward, clinically recommended adaptation to changed physiology that both partners deserve, positions that allow her to control depth and pace, particularly in earlier stages of penetrative sex, and ongoing, open communication about what feels good, what has changed, and what she needs in this specific chapter of her body's experience. There is also an emotional dimension to this that I want to name directly. Many postmenopausal women carry complex feelings about their changed bodies, feelings that cultural messaging around female aging does nothing to help with. When a man approaches his partner's changed physiology with patience, with curiosity, with the clear message that she is desirable and that her pleasure matters enough to adapt to, the impact goes far beyond the physical. It communicates something profound about how she is seen. And as I described in the previous section, feeling genuinely seen is one of the most powerful accelerators in the female arousal system. Knowing her changing body is not just technique. It is one of the deepest forms of intimacy available to couples in this stage of life. The communication bridge, the conversation that changes everything. We have covered the research. We have covered the anatomy. We have covered the emotional architecture and the physiological changes of later life. And all of it, every single piece, is made more powerful by one thing: direct, honest, caring communication. Let me give you the research finding first. A study published in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy found that only 28% of women report always communicating what they want sexually to their partner. 28%, which means that nearly 3/4 of women are having sexual experiences shaped more by assumption than by honest expression. And that is not because they do not know what they want. It is because the conditions for that conversation, the safety, the invitation, the confidence that their feedback will be received with care rather than defensiveness, have not been consistently present. For men over 60, many of whom came of age in an era with almost no cultural framework for this kind of sexual dialogue, this finding may land with particular weight. The conversation about what she actually wants, what feels good, what has changed, and what she needs now. For many couples in this age group, that conversation has simply never happened. Not fully, not honestly, not in the way that it needs to in order to close the gap we started this video talking about. So, how do you open it? First, timing matters. The conversation about sexual needs and preferences is almost never best had in the bedroom, in the moment, under the weight of performance and vulnerability. It is best had in a neutral, comfortable, everyday context. Over a meal, on a walk, in a quiet moment when neither of you is tired or stressed, and both of you feel genuinely connected. Second, the framing matters enormously. The goal is not to open a negotiation or to signal that something is wrong. The goal is to express genuine curiosity and care. Something as simple as, I want to make sure I'm giving you what you actually need. Is there anything you'd love more of or anything you'd want to try? Opens a door that most couples have never walked through. Third, how you receive what she shares will determine whether the door stays open. If she offers even a small piece of honest feedback and is met with defensiveness, with hurt, or with a retreat into silence, that door closes, possibly for a very long time. The response she needs and deserves is curiosity, warmth, genuine interest in what she has shared, and where appropriate, a willingness to act on it. Fourth, make it reciprocal. Share something of your own. Tell her what you love. Tell her what feels most connecting for you. When the conversation is mutual rather than one-directional, it becomes intimacy rather than feedback, and that distinction matters for both of you. The couples who have the most satisfying sexual relationships in later life are not the ones who happen to be most compatible. They are the ones who have learned to talk to each other honestly, curiously, continuously. That conversation is available to you. It starts with one question asked with genuine care, and it changes everything. If this video gave you something real today, a new understanding of her body, a shift,